The billionaire's guest called the black maid uneducated before the mafia boss forced him to kneel and apologize. It was a lavish evening at the Romano estate, a mansion known for its grandiose beauty and excess. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the sound of high society mingling in the opulence that only the wealthiest could afford. Among the guests was Brad Matthews, a successful businessman with a sharp tongue and a cruel sense of superiority. As he mingled, his gaze landed on Sarah Johnson, the black maid working tirelessly to serve the guests. She was used to the stares and whispers, but tonight, the words that left Brad's lips pierced through the air like daggers. "Look at you, a maid, and you're uneducated," he sneered, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The laughter that followed was cruel, and Sarah felt the weight of their mockery pressing on her chest. She had been working at the Romano estate for years, doing everything she could to maintain her dignity while serving the guests of one of the wealthiest men in the city. But tonight, she couldn't ignore the sting of those words. Her heart pounded, and her hands trembled, but she held her composure, determined not to let them see the pain. Brad's words were a reminder of the world's unjust judgments. Sarah had fought so hard to make a life for herself, to survive the odds, and yet, there were always those who saw her as nothing more than her station. As the laughter continued, a voice broke through the tension. "Enough." The room fell silent as Vincent Romano, the mafia boss and billionaire owner of the estate, stepped into the room. His presence commanded attention. His sharp eyes, usually calculating, scanned the situation with a calm, almost unnerving, precision. He didn't speak right away, but his eyes locked onto Brad, and the air in the room shifted instantly. The guests, still stunned, watched as the man known for his ruthlessness and power took a step forward. Sarah could barely comprehend what was happening, but as she looked at Vincent, she felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a man of honor, and his presence alone seemed to demand respect. Without a word, Vincent approached Brad Matthews, his gaze never leaving the man's eyes. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. Brad's face paled as he realized who was standing in front of him. A man of power, a man who could make or break careers with a single word, was now confronting him for his behavior. And just when Brad thought he might be able to brush it off, Vincent's voice came, calm but commanding. "Apologize to her." Brad, now visibly sweating, looked around the room, realizing that everyone was watching. His face flushed with embarrassment, his pride crumbling in front of him. But Vincent didn't give him a chance to respond. Now, Vincent's voice rang out again, this time laced with authority. Slowly, Brad dropped to his knees, the room still silent, as the weight of his actions sank in. He had no choice but to apologize to Sarah. His voice was shaky as he muttered the words, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it." The apology was weak, but it was enough to silence the room. For Sarah, it wasn't just the apology. It was the fact that someone of Vincent's stature had stepped in to defend her. It was the first time in a long while that she felt like she mattered. The room slowly came to life again, the guests whispering among themselves, some still shocked by what they had just witnessed. But for Sarah, the feeling of humiliation began to fade, replaced by a sense of validation. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She was a person, deserving of respect, no matter who stood before her. Vincent turned to Sarah, his gaze softer now. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah, still in shock, nodded silently, unable to fully process what had just happened. The room had shifted, and so had her life. It wasn't just about the apology, it was about the recognition. Finally, someone saw her. And that small act of justice, in the face of so much disdain, had changed everything. The guests at the Romano estate were still buzzing with the unexpected turn of events. The tension that had filled the air only moments before began to dissolve, but the shock of the moment lingered. Sarah Johnson stood at the edge of the room, her heart still racing, trying to process the weight of what had just happened. Brad Matthews, the man who had humiliated her, was now on his knees, forced to apologize, his dignity shattered in front of the crowd. The laughter and whispers of the guests had turned into murmurs of disbelief, and Sarah, still in disbelief herself, felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She had been holding her breath for so long, trying to keep her head down and avoid confrontation, but now, someone had stood up for her. Vincent Romano, the man she had always served quietly in the background, had stepped in, not with the cold, detached authority she had expected, but with a raw sense of justice. The Mafia boss had done what no one else had dared. He had made Brad face the consequences of his actions, forcing him to kneel and apologize. It was a moment Sarah would never forget. She looked around the room, the same room that had once felt so intimidating, now seeming different. The grand chandelier overhead no longer felt like a symbol of power and distance, but rather a reminder of the change that had just taken place. Vincent's eyes met hers again, and for the first time, she saw something in them that she had never noticed before. It was not just the calculated, cold gaze of a businessman or a mafia boss. There was something more human there, something that made her feel seen. "Are you okay?" Vincent's voice, soft and genuine, broke through her thoughts. Sarah blinked, caught off guard by the kindness in his tone. She had always known Vincent as the powerful, untouchable figure of the estate, someone who controlled everything with a mere glance. But now, in this moment, he seemed almost approachable. She nodded silently, still processing the surreal events of the evening. She had always kept her distance, knowing her place, but now, for the first time in years, she felt like she mattered. The room was slowly returning to its usual rhythm. Guests resumed their conversations, but there was a noticeable shift. The whispers had stopped, replaced by hesitant glances in her direction. Brad, still kneeling, looked like a man who had just had the ground pulled out from under him. His pride was shattered, and there was nothing he could do to salvage it. Vincent, however, did not waste another moment on him. With a single glance, he dismissed Brad and turned to Sarah once more. "Come with me," he said, his voice no longer commanding, but instead carrying a tone of invitation. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should follow. She had never been asked to do anything by him, certainly not in this way. But there was something in his tone that made her feel like it was an order, yet one that she didn't mind following. She walked behind him, her steps hesitant but steady. They moved through the grand hall, past the other guests who were still talking in hushed tones. Vincent led her to a small sitting room, away from the crowd. It was quiet here, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Vincent turned to face her once they were inside, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was an awkward silence between them. Sarah wasn't sure what to say or how to respond. This was the closest she had ever been to him, and yet, she still felt a distance. "You didn't deserve that." Vincent finally spoke, his voice low and steady. Sarah looked up at him, surprised by the sincerity in his words. No one should treat another person like that, no matter who they are. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to process what he was saying. Vincent, the powerful mafia boss, was speaking to her, acknowledging her worth in a way she had never expected. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She had always been taught to stay silent, to never ask for anything. But now, in this moment, she felt like she could finally speak her truth. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Vincent gave her a small nod, as if acknowledging her gratitude. "It's the least I could do," he said quietly. "You've worked here for years, and you've always kept your head down, never asking for anything. I've seen how hard you work. No one should treat you as less than anyone else." Sarah was speechless. She had never imagined hearing such words from him. Vincent Romano, the man who controlled everything in his world, was standing before her, speaking to her as an equal. It was a moment she would never have dreamed of. Vincent gave her a thoughtful look before continuing. "You should never have to endure that kind of treatment. You deserve respect, just like anyone else in this house." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been the one to silently endure, to serve without complaint. But here, in this moment, Vincent's words made her feel like she was more than just a maid. She was a person with dignity, with value. It was an overwhelming realization. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. As the silence lingered between them, Vincent turned toward the door, breaking the moment. "I'll make sure something like that never happens again," he said, his voice firm but still carrying that sense of warmth. Sarah nodded, her heart full of gratitude. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt a sense of hope. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just a maid. In Vincent's eyes, she was a person, deserving of respect and dignity. And that small but powerful act of justice had changed everything. Days passed since the unforgettable night at the Romano estate, but the memory of what happened still lingered in Sarah's mind. She could hardly believe it. The moment when Vincent Romano, the infamous Mafia boss, had intervened on her behalf. It was something she had never imagined would happen, especially not from someone like him. The man who controlled empires with a word, the man who had built his reputation on ruthless decisions, had shown her kindness. It was a kindness that made her rethink her entire life. The estate felt different now, almost like a second home. There was a quiet pride in her heart as she worked, a newfound sense of dignity that had been sorely lacking before. The other staff noticed the change too. Sarah was no longer the invisible maid, scurrying about unnoticed. There was a subtle shift in the way people looked at her. Whispers followed her through the halls, not of contempt, but of curiosity. The other workers were starting to respect her in a way they never had before. It was clear that something had shifted, not just in Sarah, but in the atmosphere of the Romano estate itself. No one dared to question Vincent's decision, and those who had witnessed the apology felt the weight of the moment. Sarah's position within the household, though still that of a maid, felt somehow elevated. Vincent's words had validated her, in a way nothing else ever had. Days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Sarah continued her work, now with a quiet confidence that was hard to miss. She still cleaned the grand rooms and polished the silverware, but her actions had purpose, not servitude. Her heart felt lighter, and she began to smile more often, a smile that didn't feel forced or out of place, but genuine. Vincent, on the other hand, continued his life as the powerful businessman and mafia boss that he was. He never spoke of the incident again, but Sarah could see a subtle change in him too. His gaze when he passed by her was no longer cold or indifferent. He looked at her with something resembling respect, a recognition of her humanity that he had never given her before. It was during one of these quiet moments that Vincent approached Sarah again, this time for a casual conversation. It was unexpected, and at first, Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. He had never engaged with her like this before. She had always been just another person in the background, a servant in his world. "Sarah," Vincent called softly as she was wiping down the marble countertop in the kitchen. "Yes, Mr. Romano," she replied, looking up in surprise. He was standing just a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his usual stoic expression replaced by a slight softness. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice calm. Sarah stood still, unsure of where this conversation was heading. "You've been working here for a while now. How long has it been?" he asked, his eyes scanning her face. "About 5 years, sir," Sarah answered, trying to keep her voice steady. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime, but at the same time, it felt like it had passed in the blink of an eye. Vincent nodded, a thoughtful look crossing his face. "And in all that time, have you ever thought about what you really want? What you want to do with your life?" Sarah was caught off guard by the question. She had always kept her head down, focused on her work, never thinking beyond the walls of the estate. I haven't really thought about it, sir," she admitted, feeling a pang of embarrassment. "I've been focused on my work here." Vincent took a step closer, his eyes studying her with an intensity that made Sarah's heart race. "You're more than just a maid, Sarah," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have a lot of potential. You don't have to stay here forever." Sarah didn't know how to respond. The idea of leaving the estate, of pursuing something more, seemed impossible. But Vincent's words had struck a chord in her. For the first time in a long time, she thought about what she could be if she wasn't bound by the invisible chains of her station. "I know it's not easy to think about," Vincent continued, sensing her hesitation. "But there's a world out there, Sarah. You deserve to be part of it. Not just here, cleaning and serving." His words were like a beacon of hope, something she had never allowed herself to entertain. Could she really leave the life she had known for so long? Was it possible to carve out a different path for herself? "I'll help you if you want," Vincent added, his gaze unwavering. "You don't have to do it alone." The offer hung in the air between them, the weight of it settling over Sarah like a blanket. She had always felt so small, so insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But now, with Vincent's offer, she felt like she had the power to change her life. The thought of it was both thrilling and terrifying. For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She simply stood there, staring at Vincent, trying to process everything he had just said. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" Vincent's lips curled into a small smile, one that was more reassuring than anything she had ever seen. "You don't have to stay in this house forever, Sarah. I can help you get a job elsewhere, somewhere you can be appreciated for your skills. I can help you get the education you deserve, if that's what you want. You can be whoever you want to be." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. It was a promise. A promise that she could finally escape the limitations of her life, the constraints that had always held her back. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. A future she had never dared to imagine was now within her reach. As the weight of his words settled into her heart, Sarah realized something profound. She had the power to change her own life, and Vincent Romano was offering her the opportunity to do so. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who could choose her path, someone who could be more than just a servant in the shadows of a mansion. And that realization was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I am not sure what exactly happened after that moment, but things changed. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she had felt so conflicted about her future. Every conversation with Vincent, every glance he gave her now, made her question everything she had known about herself. There was an unsettling excitement growing inside her, a desire to break free from the mold she had been trapped in for so long. Vincent's offer lingered in her mind, and though she hadn't yet taken action, it began to feel like the only way forward. As the days passed, Sarah worked with the same precision and grace she always had, but now, there was an undeniable difference in the way she carried herself. She walked with her head held just a little higher, and when she made eye contact with other staff members or guests, there was an added confidence, a sense of self-worth that hadn't been there before. It was as though she had started to see herself in a different light. The days blurred into each other, but there were moments of clarity that struck her. In the quiet of the evening, when the house had calmed down, Sarah would sit by the window in the staff quarters, staring out at the expansive grounds of the Romano estate. The mansion, so grand and imposing, now seemed less like a symbol of power and more like a reminder of her own limitations. She had been invisible for so long, her life shaped by the expectations of others. But Vincent had changed that in one unexpected conversation. He had made her feel like she could be more. One afternoon, as she was dusting the grand library, she caught sight of Vincent entering the room. She froze for a moment, unsure of why he had come. Their conversations had been brief, and the moments they shared were always professional, but today felt different. Vincent approached her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Sarah, I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "About what, sir?" she asked, unable to keep the uncertainty from her voice. Vincent studied her for a moment before speaking again. "About the future. About what you want. You've worked here long enough, and I've seen the way you carry yourself." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined Vincent would continue to talk about her future, let alone ask about it again. He was the Mafia boss, the man who had everything, and she was just one of the countless employees who served him. "I want to help you take the next step, Sarah. I told you before that I'd help you, and I'm not going to back out of that offer. But now it's up to you. What do you want to do?" His words were calm, but there was an undeniable force behind them. It was a question Sarah had never really been asked. What did she want? For so long, she had been content to live for others, to fulfill the needs of her family, to serve the estate, to stay out of the way. But now, with Vincent's words echoing in her mind, she realized that she hadn't thought about herself in years. She had been so caught up in survival that she had never allowed herself the luxury of dreaming. Vincent watched her intently, waiting for her answer. Sarah took a deep breath, and for the first time, she felt like she could speak freely. "I want more," she said softly. "I want to be something more than just a maid. I want to do something that matters." The words came out slowly, as if they had been trapped inside her for years. It felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. Vincent nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Good," he said. "That's the first step." Over the next few weeks, Vincent followed through on his promise. He arranged for Sarah to receive private lessons in business and management, skills that were far beyond what she had ever imagined for herself. The lessons were difficult, but Sarah was determined to learn. It wasn't just about the knowledge. It was about proving to herself that she could achieve something greater than what she had known. As Sarah continued her lessons, she began to see the world differently, no longer confined to the shadows of the Romano estate. She started to imagine what life could be like if she pursued her dreams. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. Vincent continued to be a quiet presence in her life, always there when she needed guidance, but never pushing her too hard. He respected her autonomy, allowing her to make her own decisions, but his support never wavered. It was during one of their lessons, as she was studying a complicated financial report, that Sarah realized just how much she had changed. She was no longer the timid maid, uncertain of her place in the world. She had become someone capable of understanding complex ideas, someone who could imagine a life beyond the estate. "I'm proud of you," Vincent said one afternoon, as they reviewed one of her reports together. Sarah looked up at him, surprised by his words. It wasn't often that Vincent showed such vulnerability. "You've come a long way," he continued. "You have the potential to do something great." Those words stuck with her. For the first time in her life, she began to believe that she was worthy of something more. She wasn't just a maid. She was a person with goals, with aspirations, and with the ability to achieve them. In that moment, as Vincent smiled at her with a rare warmth, Sarah realized that the future she had always dreamed of was no longer a distant hope. It was within her grasp, and it was a future she would fight for. The weeks passed, and Sarah found herself on the precipice of something she had never dared to imagine before. Vincent's mentorship had opened doors she never knew existed. His guidance had transformed her life in ways she could hardly believe. She was no longer just the maid at the Romano estate. She was learning, growing, and stepping into a world that was so far beyond the one she had known. The lessons in business, finance, and management were challenging, but they were also invigorating. With each new concept, Sarah felt a spark of excitement, a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She wasn't just doing this for survival anymore. She was doing it for herself. There were moments when she doubted herself, when the old fears crept in, fears of inadequacy, of not belonging. But Vincent was always there, encouraging her, pushing her forward when she wanted to retreat. "You're doing great," he would say, his voice calm but firm, and Sarah would find the strength to push through. It was during one of these moments of doubt that Vincent said something that stuck with her. They were sitting in his office, surrounded by papers and reports, and Sarah was feeling overwhelmed by the complexity of a financial forecast they were reviewing. "You're more than capable of this, Sarah," Vincent said, looking up from the papers. "Don't ever think you're not enough. You have everything it takes to succeed." His words were simple, but they were powerful. They resonated deep within her, reminding her that she had a future ahead of her, one she was now capable of shaping. It wasn't just about what Vincent had given her. It was about what she had found within herself. She was no longer afraid to take risks, to embrace the unknown. As the months went by, Sarah began to implement the skills she had learned. She started working on small projects for Vincent, helping with the management of his business affairs. At first, it was nothing big, organizing schedules, handling minor negotiations, reviewing documents. But as she proved herself, the tasks grew more complex, and Vincent gave her more responsibility. One afternoon, Vincent called her into his office, a serious expression on his face. "I have a job for you, Sarah," he said, looking up from a stack of papers. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she had learned to approach each new task with determination. "What is it?" she asked, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. Vincent pushed a folder across the desk toward her. "I need you to handle a business proposal with one of our partners. They're looking for someone who understands both the financial and managerial sides of things. I believe you're ready for this." Sarah's eyes widened. This was it. This was the moment she had been working toward. "I can do it," she said, her voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside her. "I know you can," Vincent replied with a nod. "Take your time, and don't hesitate to ask for guidance if you need it. But I trust you." As she left his office, Sarah couldn't believe what had just happened. She had been given a real opportunity to prove herself, to take on a significant role in Vincent's business. She was no longer just someone who followed orders. She was now someone who could make decisions, contribute to the success of the business, and, most importantly, create her own path. Over the next few days, Sarah worked tirelessly on the proposal. She stayed up late, researching, calculating, and drafting the details. It was the most challenging task she had taken on, but she didn't back down. With every step, she felt more confident, more capable. When the proposal was finally ready, she presented it to Vincent. He looked it over carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he looked up at her. "Well done, Sarah," he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "This is exactly what we needed." Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off her shoulders. She had done it. She had proven to herself and to Vincent that she was more than capable. It was a turning point in her life. No longer was she just a maid in the shadows. She was a woman with a future she had built with her own hands, with the knowledge and confidence she had gained through Vincent's guidance. As Sarah walked out of Vincent's office that day, her heart swelled with pride. She knew that this was only the beginning. There were still challenges ahead, but she was no longer afraid of them. She had the skills, the determination, and the support of someone who believed in her. And for the first time in her life, Sarah truly believed in herself. She was ready to take on whatever came next. Months passed since Sarah had been given her first real responsibility in Vincent's business, and she had proved herself time and time again. Every task, every challenge, she approached with determination and a growing confidence she had never known before. She wasn't just the maid anymore. She had become an integral part of the operations at the Romano estate, and her transformation had not gone unnoticed. Vincent, ever the enigmatic figure, remained a quiet force in her life, guiding her with subtlety, his presence a constant reassurance that she was on the right path. As Sarah took on more responsibilities, her confidence grew. She was managing important projects, making decisions that affected the business, and even starting to attend meetings that had once seemed so far out of reach. It wasn't just the work that had changed, it was her entire outlook on life. She began to see herself as someone who belonged in this world of power and influence. One evening, after another successful meeting with one of Vincent's partners, Sarah found herself alone in the grand dining room of the estate. The mansion was quiet, the guests long gone, and the staff was finishing their tasks. Sarah sat at the large dining table, her mind still racing from the meeting. She hadn't realized how much she had changed until that moment. A year ago, she would have never imagined herself sitting at a table like this, let alone having a voice in the decisions that were made within these walls. The door creaked open, and Vincent stepped into the room. He hadn't changed. Still the same powerful figure, commanding yet composed. But there was something different about the way he looked at Sarah now. There was respect in his eyes, not just for her work, but for her growth. "I've been thinking," Vincent said as he approached her, his voice calm, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "About your future." Sarah looked up at him, her heart racing. It was rare for Vincent to speak about her future directly, but she knew that what he was about to say would be important. "You've come a long way," he continued, "and I think it's time to take the next step." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had always wondered what the next step would be, but she hadn't expected Vincent to be the one to offer it. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Vincent paused, his eyes searching hers. "I think it's time for you to leave the estate. Not permanently, of course, but I want you to go out into the world. You've learned enough here to make an impact elsewhere. It's time for you to build your own path." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Sarah's mind raced. Leave the estate? For so long, she had been tethered to this place, and the idea of stepping outside its walls felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But as Vincent's words sank in, she realized something. She was ready. Ready to leave behind the life she had known, ready to step into the world beyond the Romano estate. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent smiled softly. "You've been ready for a long time, Sarah. You just needed to see it for yourself." The thought of leaving, of venturing into the unknown, filled her with fear, but it was also liberating. For the first time, she realized that she wasn't confined by her past. She wasn't just a maid, just someone who had been overlooked for so long. She was a woman with ambition, with skills, and with the power to shape her future. "Where would I go?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. Vincent's smile deepened. "I've made some connections. You'll find your way. I'll help you, of course. But this is something you need to do on your own. It's your time." Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. It was time. It was time to take what she had learned, what she had earned, and move forward. She had never imagined a future outside the estate, but now, She could see it clearly. The world was waiting for her. She was no longer bound by the limitations of her past. She had the skills, the knowledge, and the confidence to build her own life. And Vincent, the man who had once been a distant figure of power, had become her mentor, her guide, and her unwavering support. She stood up from the table, her heart filled with a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. The road ahead would not be easy, but Sarah knew she was ready. She had the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Vincent gave her a knowing nod. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You've done all the hard work yourself." As Sarah walked out of the grand dining room and into the night, she felt a sense of freedom she had never experienced before. The stars above seemed brighter, and the world ahead seemed full of endless possibilities. She was no longer just a maid. She was Sarah Johnson, a woman ready to make her mark on the world, a woman with a future she had built for herself. And as she stepped into the unknown, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. As the days passed, Sarah found herself adjusting to a new reality, one that she had never imagined for herself. The world outside the Romano estate was vast, unfamiliar, and full of opportunities that both excited and terrified her. Vincent's offer had been life-changing, but now, as she stood on the edge of a new chapter, she had to take the first step. The time had come for her to leave the mansion and venture out on her own. Vincent had made it clear that he would always be there to support her, but it was up to her to make her own way. She had spent so many years living in the shadows, confined by the estate's walls, that the thought of being on her own felt overwhelming. But with each passing day, Sarah grew more confident in the skills she had acquired. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the Romano estate all those years ago. The woman who had been shy, uncertain of herself, and willing to accept whatever life handed her. Now, she was different. She was capable, determined, and ready to face whatever challenges the world had to offer. The first few weeks were difficult. She had to adjust to the pace of life outside the estate, where things weren't always as neatly organized as they had been in her previous world. She took on small freelance projects, using the skills she had learned in business and management. At first, it was slow. She wasn't yet known in the business world, and she had to prove herself all over again. But Sarah was used to hard work. She poured herself into every task, taking the time to learn, adapt, and grow. It wasn't long before her reputation began to spread. She was diligent, intelligent, and professional, a woman who was capable of making a real impact. Slowly but surely, the work started to come in. She built relationships, learned to negotiate, and gained the confidence that she had always lacked. As Sarah's business started to grow, she found herself reflecting on how far she had come. There were moments when the fear crept back in. Fear of failure, fear of not being good enough. But she had learned to push past it. She reminded herself of the woman who had been willing to accept the role of maid, of the woman who had been content to stay in the shadows. She wasn't that woman anymore. She was in control of her own destiny. One evening, as Sarah sat at her small desk in her apartment, reviewing a new contract, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Vincent. "Sarah," he said, his voice steady as always. "I've been following your progress. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Sarah's heart swelled at his words. She had worked so hard to make a name for herself, and hearing Vincent acknowledge her success meant more to her than she could express. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without your help." Vincent chuckled softly. "You did the work, Sarah. You proved yourself. I just gave you the tools." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Vincent spoke again. "I have an opportunity for you. There's a new project I'm working on, and I think you're the perfect person for it." Sarah felt a rush of excitement. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Vincent had always been supportive, but this was a new level. "What kind of project?" she asked, her voice steady with anticipation. "It's a business venture, one that could expand your reach. I need someone who understands the intricacies of management, someone who knows how to handle both the financial and operational sides of things." Vincent's words made Sarah's heart race. This was the opportunity she had been hoping for. She had already proven herself, but now she had the chance to prove her worth on a larger scale. "I'm ready," she said without hesitation. "I'm in." "Good," Vincent replied. "I'll arrange a meeting with the team. Get ready, Sarah. This is just the beginning." The call ended, and Sarah sat there for a moment, stunned. She had worked so hard to get to this point, and now, she was being offered a chance to take her skills to the next level. It was more than she could have ever dreamed of. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah attended meetings, made connections, and worked tirelessly to prove herself. The project was challenging, but it was also incredibly rewarding. With every task she completed, she felt more confident, more capable. She was no longer the woman who had been unsure of her place in the world. She was a force to be reckoned with. Vincent continued to be a source of support, but it was clear that Sarah was no longer relying on him for validation. She had found her own voice, and she was using it. As the project neared its completion, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much she had changed. She had come so far from the shy maid in the Romano estate, the woman who had once believed that her only worth was in serving others. Now, she was a successful businesswoman, someone who had created her own path. And as she stood on the edge of this new chapter, she realized that the journey was only just beginning. As Sarah stood at the edge of her new journey, the weight of what she had achieved settled into her bones. The Romano estate, once the place that had defined her existence, now felt like a distant memory. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had walked away from the confines of her past and stepped into a world where she was no longer invisible. The business venture that Vincent had introduced her to had opened doors she never thought she could enter. She had been tasked with overseeing a new division, and despite the pressure, she thrived in the environment that once seemed so foreign to her. Every decision she made, every challenge she faced, felt like a small victory. With each success, Sarah grew more confident in her abilities. No longer was she the shy, uncertain woman who had once feared failure. Now, she was someone who met challenges head-on, a woman whose decisions were respected by those around her. The project was on track, and her team was growing. Each person a reflection of her hard work and determination. It was during this time that Vincent checked in with her, as he often did, offering his support and advice when needed. They met in a quiet cafe one afternoon, away from the hustle and bustle of the estate, and it was there that Sarah realized just how far she had come. "You're doing well, Sarah," Vincent said, a rare smile playing on his lips. "This is exactly what I hoped for you. You've earned every bit of success." His words were genuine, and Sarah couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. She had worked so hard for this moment, and hearing him acknowledge it was more meaningful than she could have imagined. "Thank you, Vincent," she replied. "I never thought I could get here. It's all thanks to what you showed me." Vincent raised his hand, a gesture that indicated that Sarah was the one who had done the work. "You did it. I just gave you the tools. But you've built something lasting. You're the one who should be proud." As they spoke, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. She had always looked to Vincent for guidance, but she realized that she had surpassed even his expectations. She was no longer the woman who had relied on others to lead her. She had become her own leader. The path she had chosen wasn't without its challenges, but it was hers, and that was all that mattered. It was an exhilarating feeling to know that she had the power to shape her own future. As the weeks passed, Sarah's role continued to expand. She began to oversee more complex projects, taking on responsibilities that once seemed out of her reach. Her team looked to her for guidance, and she gave it freely, always leading with the knowledge that she had earned her place at the table. The confidence she had gained was reflected not just in her work, but in the way she carried herself. When Sarah walked into a room, people took notice. The quiet woman who had once shuffled about in the background was now a force to be reckoned with. One evening, after a particularly successful meeting, Sarah sat in her office, reflecting on how far she had come. Her phone buzzed, and she looked at the message. It was from Vincent. "There's a new opportunity for you. Let's talk." The words filled her with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. She had come to see Vincent not just as a mentor, but as someone who truly believed in her potential. When they met, he wasted no time. "There's a new project," he said. "A big one. It's an international venture, and I want you to lead it." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, the one that would truly cement her place in the business world. "I'm ready," she said without hesitation, her voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, as if assessing her readiness. Finally, he nodded. "I know you are. You've proven yourself time and again. This is your chance to take everything you've learned and apply it on a global scale. Sarah couldn't help but smile. The weight of what she was about to take on didn't overwhelm her. Instead, it ignited a fire within her. This was what she had worked for, and now, it was within her reach. As she left the meeting, the weight of the world seemed to shift slightly. She wasn't just Sarah, the maid-turned-businesswoman anymore. She was Sarah Johnson, a woman with a future full of possibilities. She knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but she was no longer afraid. She had the skills, the knowledge, and the drive to succeed. And with that, she stepped into the next chapter of her life, ready to take on the world in ways she had once only dreamed of. The days following Vincent's offer felt like a whirlwind for Sarah. She had been given the chance to lead a major international project, one that could change the course of her career, and every part of her knew that this was the moment she had worked for. The initial excitement had been followed by a surge of nerves, but she quickly learned to use that nervous energy to fuel her drive. The project was unlike anything she had handled before. It was complex, demanding, and far-reaching, and Sarah threw herself into the work with a level of dedication she hadn't thought she was capable of. The first few weeks were challenging. Sarah had to learn quickly, adapting to the fast pace of international business, managing a team spread across different time zones, and keeping up with the ever-evolving needs of the project. But she was used to hard work and long hours. She was used to pushing herself beyond her limits. Every decision she made, every problem she solved, felt like a step closer to her ultimate goal. Vincent remained a steady presence, offering advice when needed, but giving Sarah the freedom to make her own choices. His trust in her was both a comfort and a challenge. She knew that he believed in her, but she also knew that she had to prove herself, not just to him, but to everyone involved in the project. As the weeks went on, Sarah found herself gaining more confidence. She was no longer just the woman who had started as a maid in the Romano estate. She was now a leader, making decisions that affected people's livelihoods and shaping the future of the business. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Sarah doubted herself, when she wondered if she was truly cut out for this kind of responsibility. But each time those doubts crept in, she remembered the woman she had become. She remembered the woman who had learned from Vincent, the woman who had fought to change her life. And she pushed forward. By the time the project entered its final stages, Sarah was fully in control. Her team had grown to trust her, and the results of the project were beginning to show. It was a success, one that far exceeded expectations. As she sat at her desk late one evening, reviewing the final reports and thinking about the journey she had taken, she couldn't help but smile. This was what she had worked for. This was the culmination of everything she had done, everything she had learned, and all the sacrifices she had made. Sarah wasn't the same woman who had walked into the Romano estate all those years ago. She wasn't just a maid or a servant. She was someone who had taken control of her own destiny. She had built a future for herself, and she had done it with her own hands. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Vincent. "Sarah," his voice was steady but filled with a hint of pride. "I just wanted to tell you that I've seen the reports. You did it. You've not only completed the project, you've exceeded every expectation. I'm proud of you." Sarah's heart skipped a beat at his words. She had worked so hard for this moment, and to hear him say that meant more than she could express. "Thank you, Vincent," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without everything you've taught me." Vincent was silent for a moment, and Sarah could hear the faint sound of a smile in his voice when he spoke again. "You did it yourself, Sarah? You earned this. Now, you're not just working for me, you're working for yourself." Those words hit her hard. She had always seen herself through the lens of what she had done for others, what she had done to survive. But now, Vincent was right. She had done this for herself. "What's next?" Sarah asked, feeling a surge of excitement. She knew that this success was only the beginning, that there were still countless opportunities waiting for her. "Next?" Vincent's voice held a hint of mischief. "Next, you decide. You've earned your place in this world, Sarah. It's time for you to shape your own path. The world is yours." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had spent so long following a path set out for her by others, but now, she was free to choose her own direction. The world was indeed hers, and she was ready. She wasn't afraid anymore. With Vincent's support, she had built a career, a life that had once seemed impossible. And now, With the success of the international project, she had proven to herself that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The next chapter was hers to write. And Sarah Johnson, the woman who had once been invisible, was ready to step into the future she had created for herself. Sarah sat at her desk in her small office, looking out the window at the bustling city below. It had been several months since the success of the international project, and life had changed in ways she couldn't have predicted. She had built a name for herself in the business world, and the work kept coming. Clients were now seeking her expertise, and her reputation for being reliable, diligent, and innovative had spread quickly. She felt proud of everything she had achieved, but there was something else, a nagging feeling that there was more to accomplish, that she hadn't yet reached her full potential. The office was quiet, a stark contrast to the busy energy that surrounded her, and for a moment, Sarah allowed herself to reflect on her journey. She thought back to the days when she was working at the Romano estate, unsure of her worth, simply going through the motions. Now, she was a leader, making decisions, creating strategies, and pushing boundaries. She had come a long way. But even with everything she had accomplished, Sarah knew that there was still much more ahead. There were still challenges to face, new heights to reach, and she wasn't ready to stop yet. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Vincent. "Let's meet. I have something important to discuss." Her heart raced slightly at the unexpected message. It had been a while since they had met in person, and she wondered what Vincent had in store for her this time. When they met later that afternoon, Sarah noticed that Vincent seemed different. He was as composed as always, but there was a certain energy about him, an intensity in his eyes. "Sarah," he began, "I've been following your progress closely. You've made an impact, more than I even expected. But now, it's time to take the next step." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and curiosity. What could Vincent be suggesting now? She had already proven herself in the business world, and she wondered if there was more he believed she could do. "Next step?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent leaned back in his chair, regarding her with a thoughtful expression. "I've been in this world a long time, Sarah, and I've seen people rise and fall. But you've got something different. You're not just a good businesswoman. You're someone who has the potential to change industries. I think it's time for you to expand beyond just consulting. It's time to build your own empire." Sarah blinked, surprised by his words. She had never thought of herself as someone who could create something of her own, let alone build an empire. But Vincent wasn't one to offer compliments lightly, and there was something in his voice that made her believe he truly thought she could do it. "I want to help you make that leap," Vincent continued. "I know it's not going to be easy, but you've proven that you're more than capable. You have the skills, the vision, and the drive to make it happen." The words hit her like a wave, and for a moment, Sarah wasn't sure what to say. She had built her career from the ground up, but the idea of expanding beyond what she had already achieved was daunting. She had always been a worker, a creator, but now, Vincent was asking her to step into a leadership role on a much larger scale. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," she admitted quietly. Her voice tinged with doubt. "I've only just started to find my footing in this world. Creating something on my own, it feels like a huge leap." Vincent's gaze softened, and he nodded. "I understand the fear, Sarah. But let me tell you something I've learned over the years. The greatest achievements often come from the moments when we feel most uncertain. The world is full of people who stay where they are because they're afraid of the unknown. But you've already stepped into the unknown and come out on top. I have no doubt that you can do this." His words struck a chord deep within her. She thought of the fear she had felt when she first left the estate, when she had no idea if she was truly capable of making it in the business world. But now, she was someone who had proven herself over and over again. She had built something out of nothing, and now, Vincent was asking her to build something even bigger. "What's the first step?" Sarah asked, her voice no longer unsure, but resolute. Vincent smiled. "The first step is believing in yourself the way I believe in you. From there, we can start laying the groundwork for your empire." Sarah felt a surge of excitement. She had always dreamed of something bigger, something more meaningful than just following the path set for her. And now, she realized, the time had come to build that future. It wouldn't be easy. She knew that. But she was no longer the woman who had doubted herself, who had settled for less. She was Sarah Johnson, and she was ready to take on the world. The road ahead was unknown, but she had already overcome so many obstacles. She had proven that she could do anything she set her mind to. And with Vincent's support, she knew she could build the empire he believed she was capable of. As Sarah left their meeting, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The future was no longer a distant dream, it was hers to create. And with every step, she would make it her own. Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the plans in front of her. The weight of the responsibility she now carried was heavier than she had expected. The empire Vincent had encouraged her to build was starting to take shape, but with it came an overwhelming amount of work. She wasn't just managing small projects anymore. She was overseeing an entire division, and soon, she would have to bring together a team of people who would help her realize the dream Vincent had set her on. The idea of building something from the ground up was both exhilarating and daunting. It was a chance to create something meaningful, something that was truly her own. But it was also a chance to fail, a fear that gnawed at her despite the confidence she had built. Vincent's belief in her had been the driving force behind her decision to take the leap, but now that the reality was setting in, Sarah wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. The hours were long, and every day brought new challenges. But Sarah had learned to thrive in discomfort. She had learned to push through the moments of self-doubt, reminding herself that she was capable of handling whatever came her way. She had done it before. As she worked through her plans, her mind wandered back to the early days at the Romano estate. She thought of the woman who had once quietly gone about her duties, never imagining that she would one day be sitting at a desk like this, making decisions that would affect the course of her life. Sarah wasn't that woman anymore. She was different, stronger, more confident. But even with everything she had accomplished, she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The phone on her desk buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Vincent. "I think it's time we discuss your next step. Let's meet tomorrow morning." The words filled Sarah with anticipation. Despite the nerves she had been feeling, Vincent's words always seemed to reassure her. Every time they met, he reminded her that she was on the right path, that she was capable of handling everything that came her way. The next morning, she walked into the cafe where they often met, her mind still racing with questions about the next phase of her journey. Vincent was already there, as always, looking as composed as ever. When she sat down, he gave her a thoughtful look. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of genuine concern. "Nervous," Sarah admitted, the words slipping out. Before she could stop them, "I know I'm ready for this, but sometimes it just feels like there's so much to do." Vincent nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "That's normal. You've taken on a massive project. But remember, you didn't get here by accident. You've built this from the ground up, and I have no doubt that you'll succeed in the next phase too." Sarah felt the familiar surge of gratitude at his words, but something in his tone suggested that he wasn't just here to reassure her. "What's next, Vincent?" she asked, her voice steady now, her focus sharpening. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "Next, you start building your team," he said. "You're not going to do this alone. You'll need people who share your vision, who are as committed as you are to making this work." The weight of his words sank in. She had been so focused on the work itself that she hadn't fully considered the responsibility of leadership, of bringing people together and leading them toward a common goal. "How do I find those people?" she asked, the question lingering in the air between them. Vincent smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "You'll know. It's about finding people who are just as passionate as you are. They'll be the ones who aren't afraid to challenge you, to push the project forward. You'll see it in the way they think, the way they act." The conversation shifted from the team to the details of the project, but Sarah couldn't help but feel a sense of clarity. This was the next step. Building a team was the key to taking everything she had worked for to the next level. And while it was daunting, she was ready for it. She was no longer the person who hesitated when faced with an obstacle. She was the woman who faced challenges head-on and emerged stronger. The meeting ended, and Sarah left the cafe feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to take it. As she walked back to her office, she realized something important. She had done it. She had built a life for herself, a life that was hers to shape. And now, with the next phase of her journey ahead, she was ready to build something even bigger. The empire Vincent had envisioned for her was within her grasp, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in her way. The weeks flew by in a blur of meetings, decisions, and new beginnings. Sarah had started to build her team, just as Vincent had suggested, and she quickly realized how crucial this next step would be. Finding the right people wasn't easy. It wasn't just about hiring employees. It was about finding individuals who shared her vision, who were as dedicated as she was to building something great. She spent hours reviewing resumes, interviewing candidates, and speaking with people who could potentially join her team. Each conversation, each meeting, helped her narrow down the list, and slowly but surely, she began to see the team taking shape. It was an exciting, yet humbling, experience. Sarah had always worked alone or with a small group of people in the past, but now, she had to lead and inspire a whole team. The pressure was real, but she welcomed it. With each passing day, she grew more confident in her role. She knew that to succeed, she couldn't do it alone. She needed a team of talented, driven individuals who would help her achieve her goals. One evening, after an exhausting but productive day of interviews, Sarah sat at her desk, reflecting on the progress she had made. Her new office, which had once felt so unfamiliar, now felt like a place of purpose. The room, with its large windows overlooking the city, was her sanctuary, a place where she could focus, strategize, and make decisions that would shape the future of the business. The work had become intense, but Sarah had never felt more alive. She was pushing herself beyond her limits, embracing the challenges with a sense of determination that was new to her. Each day brought a new set of obstacles to overcome, but she had learned how to tackle them head-on, just as she had with everything else in her journey. As Sarah finalized her team and began working on the initial phases of the project, she knew it was time to check in with Vincent. She had grown accustomed to his guidance, and even though she had learned so much, she still valued his insight. They met in the same cafe where their conversations had first started. Vincent was already there when Sarah arrived, sitting at a table in the back. He looked up as she approached, offering a warm smile. "How's it going?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. "It's going well," Sarah replied. "I've put together a great team, and we're getting started on the project. It's a lot of work, but I'm excited about it." Vincent nodded, clearly pleased with her response. "I knew you'd get it right. You've come a long way, Sarah. You're not the same woman who walked into that office a year ago." The compliment took Sarah by surprise. She had always seen herself as a work in progress, constantly evolving, but hearing Vincent say those words made her realize just how far she had come. "I couldn't have done it without your support," she said, her voice sincere. "You showed me that I could do more than just follow orders. You helped me believe in myself." Vincent leaned back in his chair, looking thoughtful. "You always had the potential, Sarah. I just gave you the push you needed. Now, you're standing on your own, and it's amazing to see." Sarah felt a swell of pride at his words, but she knew there was still much to be done. "I've learned a lot from you," she continued, "but now, I'm learning how to lead. And that's a whole new challenge." Vincent smiled, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Leading isn't about having all the answers, Sarah. It's about knowing how to guide others, how to inspire them to do their best work. You've already proven that you can do that. Just trust yourself." The conversation shifted from leadership to strategy, and they discussed the future of the project, potential risks, and how to approach the next steps. Sarah listened intently, taking mental notes of everything Vincent said. His experience and wisdom were invaluable, and she knew that, even though she had come far, she still had much to learn. As the meeting came to an end, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't just a businesswoman anymore. She was a leader, a mentor, someone who had the ability to shape the future of her industry. It was a responsibility she didn't take lightly, but it was one she was ready for. As she walked out of the cafe and back into the bustle of the city, Sarah felt the weight of her journey behind her. But she also felt an overwhelming sense of excitement for the future. The path ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to take it on, and she would do it her way. The days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself standing at the helm of something bigger than she had ever imagined. The team she had carefully selected was coming together beautifully, each person bringing their own strengths, ideas, and energy to the project. The once intimidating idea of leadership was now something she felt she could navigate, and every day, she felt more confident in her decisions. The project was moving forward, and Sarah's role was evolving. She was no longer just a leader. She was a creator of a future she had once only dreamed of. Yet, With every success, a new set of challenges arose, and she found herself learning something new about herself and the world around her every day. The strain of managing so much was real, but she handled it with the same grace and focus she had learned to cultivate. Every decision she made was a reflection of her growth, and each challenge she overcame only made her more resilient. But even as Sarah thrived in her work, there were moments of quiet reflection. When the office cleared out at the end of the day, and she sat in her spacious office, the weight of everything still lingered. She thought of the days when she had worked quietly at the Romano estate, never imagining that she would be the one making the decisions. Back then, the future had seemed so uncertain, so far out of reach. Now, she was living that future, and it was hers to mold. Yet, there were still moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she truly had what it took to continue building this empire. It was during one of those moments that Vincent reached out to her. His message was simple: "Let's meet tomorrow. I think you're ready for the next step." Sarah had come to rely on his guidance, but now, more than ever, she felt the pressure of the path she had chosen. She met him the next day at the same cafe where their journey had started. Vincent was already there, his usual calm presence filling the space. When Sarah sat down, he looked at her with a mix of pride and something deeper, an unspoken understanding. "I've been watching you, Sarah," Vincent began. "You've built something incredible. But now, I think it's time to take that next leap. You've proven yourself as a leader, but there's more. It's time to think even bigger." The words hit her like a jolt of electricity. She had always been pushing towards something larger, but hearing Vincent say it out loud made it feel so real. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. Vincent smiled, the kind of smile that only someone who had seen potential in someone else could give. "I want you to think beyond just managing a team or running a project. I want you to create a legacy. It's time to take this company global. Think of the influence you could have on an international scale. You've already proven that you can handle the pressure, that you can deliver results. Now, it's about creating something that will outlast you." Sarah listened intently, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She had always focused on the tasks at hand, on proving herself in every project she took on. But the idea of creating a legacy, of leaving something behind that could shape the future, was a different kind of challenge. "How do I even begin?" she asked, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his voice steady. "You start by building connections. You start by thinking globally, not just locally. Expand your reach, bring in more people, and always remember the values that have guided you up to this point. Your integrity, your work ethic, and your vision are what set you apart. Don't let that change." Sarah's heart pounded as she processed the enormity of what Vincent was suggesting. She had come so far, but this was the next level. The thought of going global was intimidating, but she knew, deep down, that she had the capability to do it. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about leaving a mark on the world. "I'm ready," Sarah said, the words coming out with more confidence than she had expected. Vincent nodded, his approval evident in the way his eyes softened. "I knew you would be. Now it's time to take that step. The world is waiting for you, Sarah." As the meeting came to an end, Sarah felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She wasn't just going to keep building the empire Vincent had helped her start. She was going to take it to new heights, to make a difference on a global scale. The pressure was immense, but Sarah no longer felt like she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't handle. She had already proven to herself that she could face challenges head-on and come out victorious. The future was now in her hands, and with each step she took, she knew she was getting closer to the legacy she would leave behind. As Sarah left the cafe, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for the road ahead. She had come a long way, but the best was yet to come. The empire she was building was just the beginning, and now, she was ready to take on the world.